The night before my restaurant's grand opening, I could barely sleep. My hands were shaking as I arranged the menus, polished the silverware, and stood in the middle of the dining room just staring at it all like I was dreaming. The soft glow of the Edison bulbs I'd chosen cast this warm, golden light across the tables, bouncing off the wine glasses and making the whole place look like the picture I'd carried in my head for years. For so long, I told myself, one day, Emily, you'll have this. One day, you'll create a place that feels like home for everyone who walks through that door. And now, that day had finally come. I kept pacing between the kitchen and the floor, imagining the moment my family would walk in. My mom, my dad, my sisters, all of them. I'd spent weeks reminding them of the time, sending texts, even begging them to mark their calendars. This wasn't just another milestone for me. This was the milestone. I wanted them to see me, to be proud of me, to look around and say, wow, she actually did it. I could still remember every time they rolled their eyes when I said I wanted to open a restaurant. Emily, do you even know how much restaurants fail in their first year? My dad used to say, leaning back in his recliner with that half smirk, you'll waste money. You'll end up begging us for help. My mom wasn't much better. She'd say, sweetheart, maybe just find a safe job. Something steady. You don't want to stress yourself out with all this. And my sisters? Don't even get me started. To them, I was just the dreamer of the family. The one who came up with big ideas but never followed through. But standing there in that dining room, I knew I had proved them wrong. Everything was ready. The brick walls were decorated with framed photos from local artists. The smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread drifted from the kitchen, and the staff I'd hired were buzzing around me, checking last-minute details. It felt magical, like I'd finally arrived at the life I was meant to live. The next morning, I woke up early, curled my hair, put on the black dress I'd been saving for this day, and added a bold red lipstick just to feel unstoppable. When I looked in the mirror, I told myself, Emily, tonight everything changes. By 6 p.m., the restaurant was alive. Strangers trickled in first, local foodies, neighbors, people who'd seen the flyers. They sat down, ordered wine, clinked glasses, and complimented the cozy atmosphere. My staff moved like clockwork, balancing trays of appetizers and smiling brightly. I should have been overjoyed. And part of me was, but every time the door opened, my heart leapt, waiting for that moment I'd see my family walk in. 6:30 passed. 7. By 7:15, I told myself, maybe they're just running late. That's fine. At 7:30, I checked my phone. Nothing. Not a single text. By 8, I finally slipped into the back hallway, away from the laughter and chatter, and called my mom. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. I tried my dad. Straight to voicemail. My sister Hannah answered with a half-distracted, "Hey, Em, what's up?" "What's up?" I almost screamed. "You were supposed to be here an hour ago." "It's my opening night." "Oh, right. Yeah, look, we got busy. Mom wasn't really feeling like going out tonight, and Dad had a long day. We thought we'd just come by another time." Another time. The word stabbed me. My throat tightened and I could barely whisper, "This is the biggest night of my life." She sighed, like I was bothering her. "Emily, don't make it a big deal. You always do this. Expect everyone to drop what they're doing. It's just a restaurant. Just a restaurant." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were shaking, my eyes burning with tears, but I refused to let anyone in the dining room see me break. I dabbed under my eyes, fixed my lipstick, and forced a smile as I walked back out to greet a couple who had just been seated. Inside, though, I was crumbling. Every time I looked at an empty seat, I imagined my family sitting there, laughing, raising a toast. But no, those seats stayed empty. My staff kept glancing at me, probably wondering why none of my family had shown up. The thought of them pitying me, of anyone pitying me, made my blood boil. By the time the night wound down and I locked the doors, I sat at one of the tables, staring at the untouched bottle of champagne I'd bought for my family. I could still see the handwritten note I'd placed by it, reserved for family. That table had sat empty the whole night. I thought about every insult they'd thrown at me over the years, every time they doubted me, every time they made me feel small. Tonight should have been about joy, but they turned it into a scar I would never forget, and that was the moment something inside me shifted. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, a cold, sharp clarity settled in. If they didn't want to stand by me, fine. But I wasn't going to sit here and let them disrespect me anymore. No, I was going to show them, in a way they'd never forget, that Emily was no longer the dreamer they could dismiss. That night, as I wiped down the last table, I whispered to myself, "You'll regret this. Every single one of you." And for the first time, I meant it. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a dull ache in my chest. My phone buzzed with notifications, photos from customers who had tagged my restaurant on Instagram, glowing reviews left on Yelp overnight, and even a message from the local food blogger who wanted to feature me on her site. Anyone else would have been over the moon, but all I could think about was that empty table. My so-called family hadn't just skipped dinner. They skipped me. I sat at my kitchen counter, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone cold, replaying Hannah's words in my head. It's just a restaurant. The nerve. The complete disregard. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was my entire life, my savings, my late nights, my blood, sweat, and tears poured into something that finally worked. And they didn't even care enough to show up. That's when something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to cry about it anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. No, I was going to make them see. And when they finally realized how badly they'd underestimated me, it would be on my terms. The first step wasn't obvious, though. I couldn't exactly storm into their houses demanding recognition. No, I needed patience. I needed to build my power quietly, brick by brick, until the weight of it was undeniable. Revenge wasn't about yelling. It was about control, so I threw myself into the restaurant. Day and night, I was there. I learned every detail of the business, from balancing the books to running the kitchen when the head chef called in sick. I charmed customers, remembered their names, and made sure they left with smiles. Within weeks, people started calling my place the heart of the neighborhood. By month 2, we had lines out the door on Friday nights, and still, nothing from my family. Not a text. Not a call. No congratulations. They'd written me off completely. Until one Sunday afternoon, 2 months after opening, my mom finally called. I stared at her name flashing on my phone, debating whether to pick up. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emily," she said, her voice a little too cheerful. "Your dad and I were talking. We thought maybe we'd come by for dinner one night soon. How's business?" I wanted to laugh. Now they cared? After ignoring the biggest night of my life, they suddenly remembered I existed? "Business is good," I said flatly. "Real good. That's wonderful," she said. "We're so proud of you." Proud? That word set my teeth on edge. Where was their pride when I was crying alone in my restaurant with an untouched bottle of champagne? I kept my voice steady. "Sure, come by sometime. But make a reservation. We book up fast." There was a pause. I could almost hear the offense in her silence. But I didn't care. If they wanted to treat me like an afterthought, I'd give them the same treatment, only sharper. That night, lying in bed, I thought about it more. Revenge didn't mean screaming at them or throwing their insults back in their faces. No, it meant letting them feel small, invisible, exactly how they'd made me feel. So I started planning. I created special events at the restaurant, wine tastings, live music nights, charity dinners. And every time I made sure the community, strangers, and even local media were there. I wanted to build a reputation so big that my family couldn't escape it, even if they tried. And slowly, it worked. One evening, as I was pouring wine for a couple, Hannah walked in. My jaw nearly dropped, but I quickly masked it with a polite smile, the same smile I gave any customer. She looked uncomfortable as she sat at the bar. "Hey, Em," she said softly. "Welcome," I replied smoothly. "Do you have a reservation?" Her face reddened. "It's me, Hannah." I tilted my head. "Yes, I know. But we're fully booked." You'll have to wait like everyone else. The way her eyes widened, that was my first taste of satisfaction. She wasn't my sister in that moment. She was just another customer who had to stand in line for something she once dismissed as just a restaurant. Eventually, I found her a seat, near the kitchen, away from the main floor. I watched her squirm as she looked around at the happy customers, the buzzing atmosphere, the staff rushing around like pros. She left early, embarrassed, and I knew she'd report back to the rest of the family. It was working. By the end of the year, my restaurant had been featured in a local magazine. A TV crew even came to do a segment on young women entrepreneurs. The night it aired, I sat in my living room sipping wine, imagining my family watching me on their screens, realizing they couldn't escape me anymore. And then it hit me. The perfect revenge. I'd been thinking too small. Petty humiliations were satisfying, sure, but I wanted more. I wanted them to feel what I felt that opening night. Invisible, unimportant, left out. So I decided to plan something bigger. A family dinner, but not at their table. At mine. I would host a private event at the restaurant, something grand, something unforgettable. I'd invite them all, every single one of them. And when the night came, they wouldn't just walk into my restaurant. They'd walk into my world, on my terms. I could already picture it. The chandeliers glowing above, the music soft in the background, the room full of people who admired me. And my family sitting there, finally forced to see me, finally realizing the mistake they'd made. But that wasn't enough. No, I had something more in mind. Something that would cut deeper than words ever could. And as the idea took root in my mind, a smile spread across my face. For the first time since that awful night, I didn't just feel strong. I felt powerful. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the story they thought they knew about me, and I couldn't wait to watch their faces when it happened. The idea of the family dinner consumed me for weeks. Every spare moment, when I wasn't at the restaurant handling customers or running inventory, I was planning. I knew it had to be flawless. The atmosphere, the food, the timing, it all needed to come together in a way that left no escape for them. I didn't just want them to see my success. I wanted them to choke on their regret. I started by choosing a date. Not just any day. I picked a Saturday night during one of our busiest months. That way, the restaurant would already be buzzing, and they'd see with their own eyes what I had built. I designed a family appreciation night, an excuse that sounded sweet and inviting, but was really my stage to corner them. When I called my mom to invite them, her voice was wary. "What's the occasion, Emily?" "Just dinner," I said lightly. "I thought it'd be nice for us to all sit down together. At my place." There was a pause, long enough that I imagined her chewing over the idea. Finally, she said, "Well, that could be nice. I'll talk to your dad." For days, I got no confirmation. Then Hannah texted me, "We'll be there. Don't make it a big thing, okay?" I laughed out loud. Don't make it a big thing? Oh, it was going to be the biggest thing they'd ever witnessed. I poured myself into the planning. The menu was a showcase of everything my restaurant stood for. Fresh ingredients, creative twists on comfort food, and desserts that looked like works of art. I ordered flowers for every table, arranged a live jazz trio to play in the background, and told my staff to treat this dinner like a private gala. Still, part of me doubted. What if they canceled? What if they bailed last minute, like the opening night? I couldn't handle that humiliation again, so I made sure they couldn't back out. I reached out to a few family friends, people my parents respected, people who loved gossip, and invited them too. I framed it as a community thank you dinner, but really it was bait. My parents would never skip an event where their friends might ask, "So, where are Emily's folks tonight?" They were trapped, and I loved it. The night of the dinner, I stood in the middle of the restaurant again, much like opening night, but this time I wasn't trembling. I was calm, confident. The staff were in position, the tables were perfect, and the jazz musicians were tuning up. I smoothed down my emerald green dress and touched up my lipstick in the mirror. When I looked at myself, I didn't just see Emily the dreamer. I saw Emily the owner, Emily the success story, Emily in control. At exactly 7 p.m., the door opened, and there they were. My mom, my dad, Hannah, and my younger sister Claire. They hesitated near the entrance, glancing around as if stepping into foreign territory. I walked over, heels clicking against the hardwood, and gave them the kind of smile I usually reserved for important guests. "Welcome," I said smoothly. "Table for 4?" My mom's lips tightened. "Emily, I'm kidding," I added with a laugh, but my voice carried just enough edge to make her shift uncomfortably. "Come, your table's ready." I led them to the center of the room, where the flowers were freshest and the view of the band was best. The other guests, friends, neighbors, and customers, looked up and smiled, some whispering greetings to me as we passed. I made sure my family noticed. Every handshake, every compliment, every "Emily, this place is incredible," was a dagger twisting deeper into their silence. As they sat down, I poured them water and handed out menus. My dad glanced around the room, clearly impressed, though he tried to hide it by saying, "It's nice." "Nice?" I echoed. "That's all?" He cleared his throat. "You've done well." The words tasted forced, and that made me smile even more. Dinner began, and my staff executed it flawlessly. Dish after dish came out, each one more impressive than the last. Guests raved, glasses clinked, laughter filled the air. But at my family's table, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I leaned in, resting my hand casually on the table. "You know, it's funny. When I was planning this place, I kept thinking about that conversation we had. The one where you all told me this was a bad idea. That I'd fail." My mom shifted in her seat. "Emily, let's not—" "No, really," I continued. My voice was steady, but inside I was savoring every second. I remember Dad saying restaurants always fail in the first year. Mom telling me I should find a safe job. Hannah reminding me I never follow through. And Claire. "Well, you just laughed." They all sat in silence. Around us, the restaurant hummed with joy, but at this table it was quiet, heavy, suffocating. I smiled sweetly. "So imagine how it felt, standing here on opening night waiting for you. And you never came. Not one of you." My dad opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "Save it. Because here's the thing, I don't need excuses anymore. I don't need your approval. I wanted you here tonight for one reason only, so you could see exactly what you dismissed. To make sure you never forget what it feels like to underestimate me." Their faces were a mix of shame, anger, and disbelief. My mom's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. Hannah stared at her plate. Claire fidgeted with her fork. For the rest of the night, I played the perfect host to everyone else. I laughed with guests, posed for photos, and clinked glasses, all while letting my family stew in their silence. They couldn't leave without looking rude in front of the community, so they sat through every painful second, forced to watch me shine. And I'll admit it, I reveled in it. Every smile, every compliment, every toast in my honor felt like justice. By the time dessert was served, I leaned in once more and whispered, just loud enough for them to hear, "This is only the beginning." Their eyes snapped to mine, but I stood, smoothed down my dress, and walked away, leaving them speechless at the center of a room that adored me. For the first time in my life, the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine, and it felt intoxicating. After that dinner, the air around our house changed. It wasn't dramatic in the way you'd see in a movie. No doors slamming, no big public scenes. It was quieter, heavier. My parents stopped calling as much. David texted less. Hannah avoided coming by. For a few days, I thought maybe they'd sulked and then moved on. But then I started hearing things. Little echoes, neighbors asking if everything was okay, a cousin I hadn't heard from in years sending a hesitant congratulations, a handful of people at the farmer's market dropping the words, "Your mom seemed off," like they were testing me. That was when I realized turning the knife at the restaurant only worked in one small place. If I wanted them to truly understand, I had to stretch the consequences until they touched everything. Friends, reputation, social standing. the little favors and conveniences they took for granted. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted them to feel the discomfort of being underestimated, to feel excluded the way they'd excluded me. So I started doing what I'd learned to do best: build influence and use it quietly. First, I ramped up the restaurant's community events. We hosted a pop-up with a local charity, something about meals for healthcare workers, and I made sure the press knew about it. I invited people my parents knew. I personally called a few of the town's influential moms and said, "Hey, we're doing a private preview for donors this Thursday. Thought you might want to come." It was casual, friendly, and exactly the kind of social leverage my mother loved. On Thursday, my phone buzzed nonstop. Photos, RSVPs, strangers praising the food. My parents got invited by neighbors who'd heard such amazing things about Emily's place and who wanted to stop by. They accepted. They couldn't very well decline when people they liked were showing interest. That night, my mother walked in the door with a friend by her side, polite and composed. She introduced herself like she'd never missed a milestone in my life. Her friend gushed about the cocktails. My mom smiled through it. I poured her a drink, stood beside her for a moment, and then went back to work, letting the evening hum with compliments and attention that had, for years, been reserved for everyone but me. Next, I took advantage of the press. The food blogger who'd written about us had a monthly newsletter and was willing to feature a local entrepreneur piece. I told the writer the story, not the petty stuff, just the arc. Young woman opens restaurant, builds community, fights stereotypes. She loved it. When the feature published, the article was sympathetic, proud, and it mentioned, almost in passing, the opening night no-shows. That detail spread fast. Social media can be kind, but it can also be a mirror that won't let you look away. My family was suddenly seeing what the rest of the town already knew. The daughter they'd shrugged at was somebody people respected. I made sure to be strategic about what I shared and what I didn't. I never called them out by name in public. I let curiosity do the work. People started to ask, "Where were your folks that night, Emily?" And I would answer with a smile, "Busy. They had other plans." It was a small line, but it made them uncomfortable because everyone could guess the subtext. When people start to whisper, even the proudest parents feel the cold. There were practical consequences, too. My dad had always leaned on a few old business contacts, friends from his golf group, a man who got him small consulting gigs. After the article, a couple of those contacts stopped returning his calls. Not because I told anyone to, but because business people sometimes avoid association with awkward family drama. It was subtle. He couldn't blame me. He could only feel it. David's job suffered in tiny ways. He'd always liked to flaunt his social life as a sign of success. After my restaurant hit the local food scene, a few clients who'd laughed at my family's private jokes started taking a closer look at their own associations. It wasn't a smear campaign. It wasn't public. But David noticed fewer invites to the boys' game nights, invitations that had once come as naturally as breath. The realization that being connected to someone who'd been publicly dismissed might not be great for business was like watching a slow leak in his ego. Hannah, who prided herself on being the family's social butterfly, found herself with fewer gossip columns to discuss. She'd always weaponized charm, texting our group before a big event to hint that she might perform some well-timed generosity. Suddenly, people started bringing up my restaurant at parties. "You should go. It's packed." The social capital that used to be hers quietly slipped, but I didn't stop there. I wanted them to see that I could be generous on my own terms. So I launched a free cooking class for local teenagers, an initiative I'd wanted since before the restaurant opened. It was a hit, and when parents and teachers started praising the program, my mother saw it on the PTA Facebook page. She couldn't ignore it. She had to see that I was building something meaningful that wasn't dependent on their applause. The most satisfying move, though, was small and deeply personal. For years, my father had bragged about his network, the people he called when he needed a favor. So I made a gracious call to one of his contacts, an older gentleman who ran a small chain of boutiques. I invited him to host a private tasting at my restaurant. an event that would bring in a cluster of people my dad admired. He accepted enthusiastically. I set the date and made sure my parents were invited. By the gentleman, not by me. Suddenly, they were attending an event where they couldn't help but be associated with my success. On the night of that tasting, my father stood next to men who nodded at him with a polite distance, and I watched from 20 feet away, plating amuse-bouche, hearing his voice fade. He tried to be gracious, to offer compliments, but the dynamic had shifted. Where he had been the social fulcrum, I had quietly become a center of gravity. None of this involved lies or illegal tricks. It was about visibility, timing, and playing the long game. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's the slow burn of people realizing the truth on their own terms. People started to bring up my restaurant at neighborhood barbecues, as if it had always been the obvious place to go. Invitations that once bypassed me now came with, "Do you think Emily will be there?" And suddenly my family had to answer for their absence. By the time the holidays rolled around, my parents found themselves fielding questions from relatives who had seen my restaurant's feature. "Why weren't you at Emily's opening?" one aunt asked during Thanksgiving. My mother mumbled something about scheduling, but the tone was defensive, the tone of someone backed into a corner. It felt good. Not the petty, childish pleasure I'd expected, but a quieter, more complete satisfaction. They were uncomfortable in ways that mattered, socially, reputationally, in the quiet gestures of people who once assumed allegiance with them. The point wasn't to humiliate them forever. The point was to shift the balance, to make sure that the daughter they'd minimized could stand in the center of a room and be recognized, not by force, but because she'd earned it. And that recognition was contagious. Once the town decided you mattered, you mattered. Still, as the months passed and things settled into a new rhythm, I noticed something that surprised me. The anger that had fueled me started to change. It didn't disappear, but it softened at the edges. I wasn't thinking of revenge so much as restoration, of my life, my family reputation, and my own sense of self-worth. I wanted them to understand, yes, but maybe I also wanted them to be better. There would be more scenes, more choices ahead. Some would hurt more than others. But whatever came next, they would no longer underestimate me. They would no longer write me off as the dreamer who couldn't follow through. I had taken the opening night scar and turned it into momentum, and the town had noticed. Emily thought she had prepared herself for every possible reaction her family could have. But nothing could fully steel her nerves when she saw them again. The restaurant had been open for weeks, and business was steady, climbing even. Locals were already calling it one of the best new spots in town. Yet tonight was different. Tonight her family had agreed, finally, to come for dinner. Not the grand opening they had ignored, but this gathering still felt like a reckoning. She stood at the host stand, smoothing the front of her dress, rehearsing every word she wanted to say. She wanted to appear calm, gracious, untouchable, but her pulse was racing. When the doors opened and her parents walked in, followed by her sister Olivia and her brother Mark, she had to grip the counter to stop her hands from trembling. "Emily," her mother said, her tone light, almost forced. "This place looks nice. Emily swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. Nice. She had built this place from the ground up, poured her savings, sweat, and dreams into it, and all her mother could muster was nice. "Thanks for coming," Emily said, her smile tight. "I wasn't sure you would." "We didn't want you to think we don't support you," her father replied, his eyes darting around the dining room. "We've just been busy. That was their excuse for skipping the grand opening, the night that had meant everything to her. She could still picture herself standing by the doors hours after the event started, scanning the crowd, hoping for them to walk in. And they never did. Now as she led them to a reserved table by the window, Emily felt a simmering heat in her chest. Tonight, she thought, they'd finally understand what they had thrown away. The waitress, a young woman named Hannah who adored Emily and treated her like family, brought menus and water. Olivia flipped hers open with a smirk. "Wow," she said, eyebrows raised. Some of these dishes are expensive. Emily clasped her hands behind her back. They're priced fairly for the quality. People come here because they know they're getting something special. Mark leaned back in his chair, smirking. Yeah, well, I'm sure people are willing to overpay for a night out. Emily felt her jaw tighten, but she refused to bite. Not yet. She wanted them to stew in their own pettiness. As the evening went on, the tension only grew. Her mother nitpicked the decor. Her father asked loaded questions about her finances. Olivia joked about how she never expected Emily to run a real business. And Mark made a point of telling the waitress to bring him a beer that wasn't too fancy, like the kind normal people drink. It was like they couldn't help themselves. Every word was a jab, a reminder that they had never believed in her. But Emily had her own plan. When the main courses arrived, she excused herself, stepping into the kitchen. She stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter, gathering her breath. "You can do this," she whispered. "You've been waiting for this." She nodded at Hannah, who gave her an encouraging smile, then returned to the dining room. Her family was halfway through their meals when she walked up, holding a microphone. A hush fell over the restaurant as other diners turned to look. Emily had never used the mic outside of private events, but tonight was no ordinary night. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This restaurant is my dream, and every one of you who has walked through these doors has made it real. You believed in me when it mattered." She paused, her eyes falling on her family. They froze, forks suspended in the air. "But not everyone believed in me," she continued. "Not everyone thought I was capable of doing this. In fact, some people I love most didn't even bother to show up for the most important night of my life, the grand opening of this restaurant. My own family didn't come." Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Emily's mother's face turned red. Olivia rolled her eyes, but her smirk faltered. "And yet," Emily went on, "here I am. Not because of their support, but in spite of their absence. Every dish you're eating, every detail you see here, it was built without them. By me, and by the people who actually care." Her father cleared his throat, trying to cut in. "Emily, this isn't—" But Emily's voice grew stronger, cutting him off. "For years I let their doubt control me. I let their criticism make me feel small. But not anymore. Tonight I take back that power. Tonight I say this. My worth is not defined by their approval. My success is not measured by whether they show up. My life is mine." The room erupted in applause. Some diners even stood. Hannah clapped the loudest, tears in her eyes. Emily's family, on the other hand, sat frozen, humiliated, their meals half-eaten in front of them. Emily lowered the mic, her heart pounding, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had waited her whole life for this moment, for them to finally see her not as the weak one, not as the failure, but as someone who had risen far above their small-mindedness. Her mother whispered something to Olivia, who grabbed her purse and stood abruptly. Mark muttered under his breath. Her father rubbed his forehead, clearly wishing he could disappear. And Emily? She just smiled, watching them squirm under the weight of their own neglect. Tonight wasn't about reconciliation. It was about revelation, and the truth had never tasted so sweet. The silence after Emily's speech hung in the air like smoke. Her family sat at the table, trapped in the gaze of dozens of strangers who now saw them not as respected parents, siblings, or role models, but as people who had abandoned their own flesh and blood. Emily walked back to their table slowly, deliberately, savoring the tension. She wasn't done. The mic had been just the beginning. Her mother leaned forward, her voice tight. "Emily, I can't believe you would embarrass us like that. Do you know how that made us look?" Emily laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Made you look? You did that yourselves when you left me standing alone on opening night. All I did was shine a light on it." Her father tried to regain control. "Let's just finish the meal quietly, okay?" "We didn't come here to fight," but Emily shook her head. "No, Dad, that's what you always do. Pretend nothing happened. Sweep it under the rug." "Not this time." The diners nearby were pretending to eat, but everyone was listening. Emily could feel their eyes on her, and for once, she welcomed it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, dropping it onto the table. Olivia frowned. "What's that?" Emily opened it and spread out papers across the tablecloth, copies of bank transfers, texts, and emails. "These," Emily said, her voice steady, "are all the times I asked for your support. Every loan request you ignored, every message you left on read, every chance you had to be there for me. And these," she tapped another sheet, "are the records of every dollar I made without you. Investors, friends, even strangers believed in me. You didn't, and now you get nothing." Her family stared at the pages, their faces draining of color. Her mother stammered, "Emily, we didn't think you'd actually make it?" Emily cut her off. "No, you didn't. You thought I'd fail just like you've always told me I would. But here's the truth. I don't need you anymore. Not your money, not your validation, not your fake support. I have built something real without you," Mark scoffed, trying to recover. "What? You think you're better than us now because you run some trendy little place?" Emily leaned in, her voice low but razor-sharp. "No, Mark. I'm not better because of the restaurant. I'm better because I finally saw you all for what you are. Selfish, dismissive, small people who can't stand that I did something without your permission. That's the revenge. You don't own me anymore." The words cut deeper than she expected. Mark's smirk collapsed, replaced with something raw and uneasy. Olivia looked down at her plate, chewing her lip. Her father rubbed his temple, and her mother blinked fast, as if fighting tears. Emily straightened and raised her voice again, so the entire room could hear. "This dinner was never about reconnecting. It was about closure. I invited you here not to celebrate, but to let you know. This is the last meal we'll ever share like this. From tonight on, you are no longer part of my story. My family isn't defined by blood. My family is the people who believed in me when you didn't." The restaurant erupted in applause again, louder this time, thunderous. Diners stood clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Emily's staff joined in from the kitchen doorway. Her family sat frozen in the storm of applause, shrinking smaller and smaller as the weight of their neglect crushed down on them. Emily turned, her face glowing with relief. For the first time, she felt free. She had carried their doubt, their cruelty, their absence for years. Tonight, she set it down forever. Her mother finally whispered, "Emily, please, we can talk about this." But Emily shook her head, her voice calm, resolute. "No, you had years to talk. Years to show up. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She gave Hannah a nod, and the waitress, grinning ear to ear, walked over with the check. Emily slid it across the table. "Dinner's on you. Consider it the price of admission to my life one last time." Her family looked stunned, humiliated, their faces pale. The applause still echoed as they gathered their things in silence and walked out, avoiding every pair of eyes watching them. Emily stood there, soaking it all in, her chest light, her heart unchained. She had imagined revenge so many times, but this was better than she ever dreamed. Not cruel, not violent, but undeniable. The ultimate punishment, forcing them to see that she didn't just survive without them. She thrived. When the door shut behind them, the room broke into cheers once more. Emily raised her glass, her smile wide, her voice strong. "To new beginnings," she said, and for the first time in her life, she truly meant it.